Jason has been breaking down the positions here. I just add my 2 cents. We took a look at quarterbacks 2 weeks ago and running backs last week, and we'll take a look at the wide receivers. Always a strength at Oklahoma, but maybe not quite the production that is typically back. But I've seen Marvin Mims on a ton of, as you mentioned, not on this particular list on the first team, but I've seen him in a lot of national magazines close to, maybe a second, third, or fourth team All-America selection.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, at the wide receiver position, Mark, it's a position group where Oklahoma, certainly not as hard as the quarterback position, but took some hits in terms of the transfer portal with Jaden Hazelwood and Mario Williams both transferring out, going to Arkansas and USC respectively. But yeah, I think when you look at it coming in, Marvin Mims is the guy, is the top, certainly the top receiver production wise coming back for this team, and that's a big guy. I mean, a big get. I think a lot of people thought there was some considerations whether Marvin Mims would go elsewhere, right? With being part of the Lincoln Riley recruiting class. Some kids recruit to a coach. I mean, they commit to a coach versus committing to a program, right? So when you look at him, certainly it was a guy that Oklahoma was super, super excited to make sure that they had back into that on the screen here. Only had 5 touchdowns, but had over 700 yards. Was a big play, was Oklahoma's best big play receiver last year. So would expect those catches to go up a little bit and his production to go up under Jeff Levy's offense. And then when you look at some of the supporting cast around him, Theo Weiss is a guy that'll certainly be a starter for this team this year. Was out last year for most of the year with a little bit of a nagging ankle, lower leg type of situation, and never really was able to make a whole lot of moves. Came back really strong in the spring, had a pretty good spring game. He's a guy that Oklahoma's going to count on, pretty significantly this year for that receiver production. Jalal Farooq is another kid that hasn't had a lot of opportunity, but played really well in the spring, had a really good game against Oregon in the last game of the season, the bowl game. And so he's a guy that's going to be expected to produce big for Oklahoma. You got Drake Stoops as well, who is a guy that, just finds a way to get on the field, finds a way to make plays. He's not going to be the most athletic kid. He's not going to beat you with his speed, but knows how to get open and is about as sure-handed as you're going to get from a wide receiver. And then there's a couple of other guys, Mark, that will be in the mix. It'll be interesting to see how much playing time they really get. So true freshman Jayden Gibson played a lot in the spring, had a long touchdown reception kind of late in that game, in the spring game, has the height, has the measurables that Levy looks for in a receiver. I think 6'3", 6'4", long arms. He's a guy that can stretch the field a little bit. So he'll play, just depending on early on how many plays he's able to make in the games. He'll certainly be part of that. Be part of that group. But then you've got another couple of kids, Brian Darvey and Trayvon West, that will. I think one of those guys needs to emerge as that 4th or 5th wide receiver in this package for Oklahoma, and certainly think that one of those will. I think early on, West in the spring probably was the guy that made a little bit more noise, played a little bit more consistently, but both of those guys will be counted on to be maybe that 4th, 5th option from a wide receiver position. Outside of the main guys that we talked about. But I think going in from a position group perspective, when you look at the top 3, it's pretty set. Would be surprised if you saw any movement outside of Marvin Mims, Theo Weiss, Farooq, and maybe Stoops getting in that top. That when you have a 3 wide or a 4 wide set.
So these two The two transfers, JV and Hester comes in from Missouri, caught 12 passes there, a couple touchdowns.
Yep.
And then LV Bunkley Shelton, those are career numbers there. He had 33 catches, I believe, 2 years ago for Arizona State and didn't play as much this past season. I'll have to double check on that. Had 1 year at 33 catches, 1 at 11, and I believe one season where he didn't get on the field much. So you think those guys are just fourth and fifth options?
Yeah, I think those two are interesting, Mark. I mean, those kids didn't have the opportunity to come in and play, at all in the spring or practice in the spring, so they're relatively unknowns in terms of the Oklahoma culture. Obviously you've got LV Bunkley Shelton that has a little bit more experience than JJ Hester does. JJ Hester just played the 1 year, obviously last year at Missouri. Bunkley Shelton, as you'd mentioned, has a little bit more experience over the last couple of years at Arizona State. So they'll be in the mix. I think it'll be interesting to see how they, they certainly could be that fourth, fifth wide receiver, could push, guys like Drake Stoops, push guys like Jayden Gibson, and then certainly Darvey and West, in that. So I think, just they're different guys, Mark. I think, which is very interesting. When you look at Hester, he's probably more of a he's more of a speedy type wide receiver, could break the long the long play. Whereas you look at a guy like LV Bunkley Shelton, who's probably more of a possession receiver. So I think when you look at this group, Mark, top to bottom, they probably don't have, outside of Marvin Mims, at least right now, they probably don't have anyone with the top end speed and the playmaking ability of a Mario Williams from last year. But I think overall, as a group, this group has an opportunity to be really, really good. And I think the one thing that you think about with this team, very much like the running backs, as we talked last week, that there's going to be a lot of running backs that get opportunities in Jeff Lebby's offense. Very much the same thing from a wide receiver production perspective. You're gonna see that, and then having a guy like Dylan Gabriel to go and spread that wealth out amongst those wide receivers. I think Oklahoma's in maybe even a little bit better spot this year, at least right now in the fall, than they were last year.
So according to Athlon's, Texas has the best wide receivers in the Big 12. I think that's pretty much of a consensus thought with all their additions. Plus, Xavier Worthy was ridiculous in his first college season last year. But they've got Oklahoma at number 2. Athlon's does as a unit in the Big 12. Now, consistent with what the media went with in terms of first team, Athlon's has no one on Oklahoma's first team, or on the first team all Big 12 from Oklahoma. They've got 6 on the second team and 4 on the third team. So similar to what I had said, it only makes sense that if you're considering this to be the best or second best team in the conference, that they would, again, Athlon's consistent with the selection of no Oklahoma players on the first or second team, or the first team, offense or defense. Athlon's is going, obviously, a Big 12 championship game appearance for Oklahoma, because they've got the Sooners at, these are all regular season records, 9-4. So they've got they basically have a tie between Baylor and Oklahoma at 9-3, 6-3 in the conference, and then Baylor's going to win the conference championship game. That's Athlon's.
Yeah, it's just kind of perusing the the internet and kind of social media and YouTube and stuff like that, people that put out some of these predictions early on. I've seen, Mark, anywhere from 7-5 to 11-1 on some of these predictions. So what I will say, and we'll get into this more, what I will say, this Nebraska game early on is going to be a big swing game for this season, I think, for Oklahoma. I think and we'll see early on, right? Nebraska plays, it's escaping me, Northwestern in week 0 in Ireland. So if Nebraska loses that game, then I think we can say that Nebraska may be the same trajectory wise, maybe close to the same team that we've seen over the last couple of years. But they go win that game, and I think they've got a couple of games where that's winnable going into that game with Oklahoma. So if Oklahoma's able to go on the road and win that game, and what's going to be a first for the first road game for Venables and staff, the first tough test, right? I mean, Oklahoma's got UTEP and Kent State, which they're not. They're not FCS teams, right? But they're not super high end. At least, especially this year, group of 5 teams. So you go and you win that game. I think you set yourself up to potentially going into Texas being undefeated. But you lose that game, and then certainly you've got some work to do throughout the year. And what I've seen early on, Mark, from a spread, I think Oklahoma's like a 2 or 3 point favorite right now. Obviously that can change, certainly kind of depending on how things go. But I think right now Vegas thinks that both of these teams, certainly you put a little bit of stock into obviously the home field advantage for Nebraska in that game. But you think right now that most people think that Oklahoma is probably slightly less than a touchdown team better than Nebraska. So I think that'll be interesting to see how that certainly how that plays out early on in the season, leading up to that game in Lincoln.
It will be. Nebraska's one of the bigger wild cards for me this season, because if you watch them from week to week, they challenged everybody they played, but they also found a way to lose. And that's been what Scott Frost has done ever since he stepped on campus, is lose 1-score games. He's got the national lead by a pretty good margin in losing games by 1 score. Well, they started their season last year against what turned out to be, they weren't a horrible team, but not a very good Illinois team, and they found a way to lose that game. And then a couple weeks later, they're playing Oklahoma, and I think the spread might have been 8 or 10, something like that. It wasn't outrageous, but Oklahoma was the better team on the field, but not significantly. They won by a score. It wasn't like Nebraska had the ball in the red zone to take the lead, but it still wasn't an impressive showing by Oklahoma. And then, of course, turned out to be, along with the Tulane game, a precursor of what most of the season was going to be for OU, and also a precursor for Nebraska, that they can play. One of the oddest stats of the season among many for Nebraska was that they actually had a point differential that was even in the Big Ten. They scored exactly as many points as they gave up, and they went 1-8. So how is that possible? Well, they beat Northwestern by 7 touchdowns, and they lost everybody else by 49 points. They lost everybody else by 6 points. Basically everybody. They lost every game by 1 score. The Ohio State game was technically 2 scores, 9 points, but if you watch the game, it was 23-17 with like a minute left. It was in doubt. They played everybody. The game was in doubt, and they figured out how to lose. Now, Northwestern's going to be no world beater this year. I don't think they're going to rebound to be a really good team like they have in the past. I think they're going to be pretty bad again. So Nebraska, I'm not going to raise the bar to say that they should go out across the ocean and annihilate Northwestern to show me something, but they should show that they're decidedly the better team. They should win by a couple touchdowns. They should, over Northwestern.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, yeah, I would feel the same way, Mark. And when you look at, I was trying to remember their early schedule. They got North Dakota, and then Georgia Southern on top of those games. So at the absolute worst, you're looking at 2-1, but certainly should be 3-0 going into that game. And so yeah, it's a big swing game for both sides. And I get you. I'm with you on this on the Nebraska side. I think Casey Thompson's a little bit of an upgrade over Adrian Martinez. But Casey Thompson's really only got one year, as a true starter, and he wasn't, the starter for the entire year last year. So, the Nebraska team, very, very much like Oklahoma, Mark, has, the winner of this game has a decent opportunity to make a nice run here early in the season. When you look at, even when you look at Nebraska, if they were to win that game over Oklahoma, they come back after a bye week and they host Indiana, then they go to Rutgers. So you could very much see a potential 6-0 start for Nebraska if they win that game. So and like I said, very very much the same way for Oklahoma. So I think this is probably the biggest game I would say on both teams' schedule, at least for the first half of the season.
Nebraska, and this is no Nebraska show, but one more note on them. Their Ohio State, Michigan State games have been replaced with Rutgers and Indiana. So they've got a substantially easier road than they had to face Ohio State, Michigan State in the other division last year.